have a business, as you can imagine, like I'm in the dry cleaning business in Olympia for over 25 years, and sometimes it's hard to find good hired help. Sometimes you have somebody for years and then they leave, and you have applicants and they last for a couple days and they leave. So the same thing is kind of true in the music business. I've had turnovers in my band for various reasons, but wanted to mention the Cafe Boys. I actually recorded on one of my CDs. I was friends with Patsy Durkis's daughter, Patty. She lived over on one of the streets across from North Hall, going up O'Neill. What was it, Washington, Jefferson? What's the next one up? Ivy. Okay, she lived on Ivy, Patty Durkis. And she gave me a stack of homemade 78 records like 25 years ago that the Cafe Boys made in 1949. And there was one that was just called The Theme. They just had a written theme, and these records were in bad shape, but I salvaged what I could. On my second album that I made, it's called Lost and Found, we had our pictures taken in front of the Penn McKee Hotel down on the brick alley between the McKeesport Elks, the Montauk Community Services building, and the Penn McKee. There's a brick alley there, and I always thought that was kind of a neat section of town. I'm kind of intrigued by the mystique of the Penn McKee Hotel. I remember as a little kid, my grandfather took me downstairs when it was a McKeesport AMVETS Post 8, like for a Christmas party, and you get an apple and an orange and a coloring book in a bag or something. I was 4 or 5 years old, in the dungeon of the Penn McKee Hotel. But we had our band picture taken there for my second CD. But the first song that I played on that record, I called it the Cafe Boys theme, in memory of the Cafe Boys. And here's just a little bit of those guys really well also. And when I was just starting out as a young band leader, one day my grandfather said, let's go take a ride to Eastland Mall. At Eastland Mall at that time, they were having flea marts. And one day we went to the flea mart in Eastland Mall, and there was this announcement board saying that this band called the Rhythmaires were playing at 2 o'clock. My grandfather said, wow, the Rhythmaires, I didn't know they were still in business. Let's stick around and watch them play. So I got to meet those guys from that day forward. I ended up actually playing drums the next week with that band after I met them, because they needed a drummer. But the guy who had the Rhythmaires, his name was Paul Bogasic. And Paul Bogasic was born and raised in Duquesne, but he lived most of his life in White Oak, right behind White Oak Park on Laurel Lane. He was quite a character also. He used to call himself Paul Roy because he looked a little bit like Roy Rogers, and he would play solo gigs with his Gibson Les Paul guitar. And his business cards were comical, because it would say on there, music by the Rhythmaires, music for all occasions, keep us in mind for your daughter's wedding, spark testing by appointment, cordwood for sale, used car parts for sale. I got the biggest kick out of that, but I ended up playing in Paul Bogasic's band, not only on the drums, but also on the accordion and also bass. A lot of people don't know this. In my teen years, I played more drums than any other instrument. When my grandfather's drummer had passed away, Pete Goebbels from the Arcadians, my grandfather got his drums, and I was 11 years old, and I would play the drums in my mother's basement up on Garbett Street, which my mother just loved that. There was another accordion player from McKeesport named Mike Kanser, K-A-N-D-C-E-R, Mike Kanser, and he had a group called the Esquires. Mike Kanser, I got to be buddies with him because he was a long-time officer at the 11th Ward Club, and he played one of those electric accordions that was called a Cordavox at the time. back in the 1960s, these new accordions came out that were organ sound along with the accordion sound, and they were electronic, and they had the bass here. You didn't need a bass player, so you could go out as a trio, a three-piece band, and sound like a full band because of these electric accordions called Accordivox that came out. 20 years later, there was a company called Iorio that also put on an electric accordion. But I also wanted to mention Mike Kanser. He was quite a nice man. He had a drummer named Ray Samaric. Ray Samaric is still alive. Matter of fact, I played at his house last month for his daughter's birthday, Chrissy's birthday, and he and his wife celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. He was always a great fan of Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa. He actually has a snare drum that belonged to Gene Krupa, and I got to see it, and he jammed with me. But Ray Samaric is quite a guy. He lives over on California Avenue in White Oak. I also wanted to mention Joe Gatto. Joe Gatto was another iconic accordion player, working accordion player. And he was from McKeesport. His daughter, I think, still lives on Evans Avenue. And he played in a group with a sax player named Bill Phillips, Bill Phillips was a longtime steward manager of the Boston Vets. So Bill Phillips on sax. And then their guitar player was John Joseph, who was a longtime barber in Dravosburg. John Joseph was also buddies with John Capus, the accordion player that I mentioned before. Also, I wanted to mention the Canova family. Okay, there were 4 brothers of Canovas. There was Sammy, Louie, Jimmy, and Frankie. Okay, well, you may not recognize the name Canova. You would if you had some of the kids at school. But I knew Jim Canova was actually the first drummer on the first Mikey D job. The first gig that I ever played as a band leader, Jim Canova played the drums. A lot of people knew him in McKeesport as Papa John, because he would run the pizza shop on Evans Avenue. And everybody brags to this day about their Italian hoagies that they had. And I just saw on Facebook a few months ago, wow, those hoagies from Papa John's in McKeesport. Does anybody know what that secret sauce was? I do! It was Catalina salad dressing. But anyways, Jim Canova was a longtime friend. And I have a lot of pictures of my bands through the years playing at International Village. And if you see any old pictures of my band playing, you see a guy with a white shirt on and white pants and a white hat and with dark hair. That was Jimmy Canova. He'd come up and play the tambourine. He had heart trouble. And he had some health trouble that kind of got him down from his 50s forward, had bypass surgery. He couldn't play the drums anymore because it's very physically active to play drums. It takes a toll on your body. Most drummers that I do know, even Walter Z, he had heart trouble too. They always have back trouble, knee trouble, heart trouble. Drums are difficult. You have to carry them in, set them up, and then you're sitting there playing these drums. But I also want to mention the Canovas. So Frank Canova is the last one that survives. He's still around, but he doesn't go by Frank Canova. You would know him as Frankie Capri. He's a famous one-man band showman. He doesn't play the accordion really much anymore, but he plays the keyboards and he does a show with all of his setup and everything. So I wanted to mention, as a matter of fact, in later years, Jimmy Canova, I would see him in the audience and say, "Jim Canova, how you doing?" He says, "No, don't call me that. It's Jimmy Capri." I says, "You're Frank, or you're Jim Canova to me." But they took on that name, Capri. I also wanted to mention him. Don DeMusi was another guy from Christie Park who had a band. He went by the Donnie D Trio. He was Donnie D.E.E. before I was Mikey D.E.E. But Donnie D Trio, they did a pretty good job. His guitar player, his name was Frank Boris, B-O-R-O-S. I know his son was a longtime mechanic at Grand Joseph's Auto Repair. But great guitar player, great band. Okay, I mentioned Leo Paradise, Frank Boris, George Bacon, Austin. I mentioned all these guys. Okay, Don's Barber Shop on the corner of Versailles and Evans. He was there from 1959 until about 2 years ago. Don Blaharski. He's 82 years old. He lives up in North Huntington. He's a longtime amateur accordion player also and an enthusiast of the music. And I also wanted to mention the Yadeski name. For 6 years, Joe Yadeski played drums in my band. He was with the Al Palmer band that was from North Versailles, East McKeesport area. But Jody Yadeski was born and raised in North Versailles, right across from the Naval Reserve Center. And his brother still owns Yadco Music, Dan Yadeski, up there. And I wanted to mention him. And then the last but not least, I wanted to mention Stan Gusky. He was a longtime saxophone player from the area. He had a group called the Diplomats. They had a popular song. They made a record of a song. And the record was so famous that Frank Yankovic took the song, recorded it, became a million seller. Here's that song.
Tick, 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 tock goes the clock on the wall as we're dancing the evening away. Tick, 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 tock goes my heart with the clock beating time while the music is gay. Tick, 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 tock is the rhythm that plays, and I know it will make you feel blue. Tick, 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 tock goes my heart with the clock, 'cause they know I am dancing with you. La 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 la.
The iconic tick-tock polka that originated right here in the McKeesport area. How do you like that? You know what? We didn't even talk about tamburitsa music yet, but I'll try to make this a little shorter. Croatian culture. Okay. We talked a little bit about the Croatian culture and all how the immigrants came to America, and they would congregate around their various, cultural clubs. And just like I talked about with the polkas, how their groups were very large. Back in these old days, the tamburitsa groups were large also. They were 12, 15-piece, 20-piece band, or groups, orchestras. My grandfather, when he was 8 years old, used to sell papers. And when he was 8 years old, he joined in 1930 the Versailles Tamburitsans. And at the Croatian club in Versailles, they would get together one night a week, and I think he paid $0.25 a week to belong to the group. And at the time, their director was Nick Bastasik. And they would also use George Bellick, the name that you would recognize because he was an iconic composer and director of the tamburitsa group down in East Pittsburgh, George Bellick. And my grandfather took the instrument from that point. As a matter of fact, I was actually able to acquire the instrument that he played in 1930. I was able to acquire it 3 years ago to be a part of my collection, which was kind of cool to own the first instrument your grandfather played in Versailles. But these groups, through the years, like I said, they downsized. I just read an article where iconic recording band leader from Youngstown, Ohio, George Scurbina, he was a Serbian immigrant. He was the first tamburitsa band ever to stand up. Because back in those days, they were large ensembles, they read music, they sat down. So this was something that, tamburitsans did not do. They would get together at the club and they would put on these shows, sometimes operatic type shows and plays and things, and they would play these large arrangements of these songs, but they were bigger groups. But then, like I said, after World War II, things started downsizing group-wise, and these 4 or 5-piece bands started popping up. Bernice, did you have anything that you wanted to add? Yeah, we're talking about tamburitsa and McKeesport. First of all, this lady that's sitting in the audience, Bernice Johnson, she has a weekly radio show on 8:10 a.m. WEDO. And it's a show that Ruth Zovchek started as the voice of the CFU in 1970. This is your, 51st, 52nd year?
Going into the 52nd year.
Going into the 52nd year, and Bernice does a magnificent job. She's on every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then they're rebroadcast at 5 o'clock p.m. She's a wealth of information because she tells me all these tidbits about the old days, about some of the groups that played, the International Village days. She served on my committees of several things that I had. Bernice, I treasure your friendship so much because of all the information you give me and so much that you do for the Croatian community here. How you play all of these songs every week and have a weekly radio show. Bernice Johnson in the audience. She's also a performing member of the Pensembles Adult Tamburissans. They get together once a week.
Once every other week.
It used to be Monday nights back in my day.
Now it's Thursday night, and we're going to be at Kennywood Park for Croatian Day.
Yay, Croatian Day's coming up in a few weeks. Yes.
September the 4th. But I was showing Mikey some pictures that I had that historically in Renzi Park here, this was from July 4th, 1955, when he was talking about these large tamburitsa groups that sat down. The original McKeesport Junior Tamburitsa, there's like 55 people on here, 3 bass players, and we were directed at that time by Walter W. Kolar.
Who was the Duquesne University Tamburissans? A long time, Walter Kolar.
Yeah, so this goes back.
And your father was a long time associated with the
Yes.
McKeesport Juniors. Wasn't he a director?
He was director for over 20-some years, and Orchestra Rados, how
Yep.
shall I say, many of you are familiar with that. I'm, how shall I say, infamous for being their first tamburitsa instructor when they were 8 years old.
How about that? And guess what? The Rados that she mentioned is going to be playing in the Blue Top Pavilion over here on Tuesday evening from 5 to 9, just right across the grass here. And I had them scheduled for the Kolo party. Now the Kolo, I know you love that. Now the Kolo dance is something famous to the Serbians and the Croatians, and even you know, it's like a Greek dance. I'm no dancer, but I just watch this stuff all the time. In certain ways, but there are a lot of different songs that have different dances to them. So in addition to having a polka night, I have a Kolo night too. And